Welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darren Shear, author of The Marketplace Christian and Marketing Like Jesus. And this is a show that helps marketplace Christians to partner with God in business to help you make disciples of your coworkers, your company, and your industry. We get more teachings and interviews like the one you're about to hear at theologyofbusiness.com. On today's episode, we'll be wrestling with the question of, is everyone called to entrepreneurship? And we're joined by Jordan Raynor. Jordan's a pretty remarkable guy. Jordan, you're not an old guy. You're a pretty young guy with all.
I look like I'm 47, but yeah, no, I'm a young 31.
And when I share some of the things with you that Jordan has been through, you guys are going to be blown away. He's a serial entrepreneur and best-selling author ×2 now, because he's got the new book out. We're going to tell you about that. And he leads a growing community of Christians following God's call to create. He currently serves as the CEO of the venture-backed startup Threshold 360, and he's also a co-founder of Citizen Investor, the world's largest crowdfunding platform of government projects. And he's twice been selected as a Google Fellow and served in the Bush White House in 2006. His book, Startup Stories, debuted in the #1 bestseller spot in Amazon in multiple categories, including entrepreneurship and Christian business. And his latest book is Called to Create, a biblical invitation to create, innovate, and risk. And we're going to be diving into that and some of Jordan's story here today. Jordan, welcome to the Theology of Business podcast.
Thanks, Darren. I love the podcast. I love the work you guys are doing. So excited to be here.
Appreciate that. So you have a pretty remarkable story. You were intending to plant a church, which, if you're entrepreneurial and you want to do something for God, that's kind of like, the first stop on the journey, right? You got to kind of wrestle with that question. So how did you go from there to then growing several venture-backed startups?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, this opportunity to potentially plant a church actually came up kind of in the middle of my entrepreneurial journey, right? So this is back in 2013, 2014, can't remember the exact year. And, prior to that, I had started and sold my first company. I was exiting my second company, a company called Citizen Investor, was selling my shares within that company. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And, I was at church one Sunday, and there was a member of the North American Mission Board there talking about the need for church planters in major cities across the United States. And specifically, he was really honing in on Washington, D.C., which is a really special place in my heart. I spent some time in D.C. When I was working in the Bush White House. I sold my first company to a company in D.C. And so I'm sitting there. I'm like, man, I love D.C. There's a need there. And it sounds like, this whole idea of church planting sounds a lot like, starting a business, right? Sure. And I was like, well, I'm good at that. I love the Lord. And, if I'm really sold out for Jesus, that's what I got to do. I got to move to DC, and my wife and I got to go plant a church. And I started, talking about this idea with some godly men in my life and just getting their counsel. And basically their advice was, Jordan, you are gifted as an entrepreneur. And yes, you love Jesus, but why do you think that means that you got to go and do something totally different, right? Mm-hmm. Like, why aren't you viewing your work as an entrepreneur, the work itself, as ministry, not just as a means of accumulating wealth to fund other people who are doing quote unquote real ministry? And those conversations were really life-changing for me. It was around that time that I picked up Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavor for the first time. And then after that, Andy Crouch's Culture Making. And those books and that experience really set me on a course to really diving deep and understanding how my faith connects with my work, specifically as an entrepreneur, right? And it was really through conversations with other Christian entrepreneurs and through researching the lives of other Christian entrepreneurs and culture creators throughout time that really led to this book. I mean, the call to create the book was really born out of my own questions about what it looks like to reimagine entrepreneurship and business, not as a means of accumulating wealth and as a means of making a name for myself, but as a means of revealing the character of God, of loving and serving others really, really well, and ultimately making disciples of Jesus Christ. And so, long story kind of short. I decided not to go to DC and plant a church. I decided to start another business. It was a consultancy working with early stage companies, helping them grow their businesses. I named the company Vocrio, combining the Latin words for calling, vocation, and create, creo, to mean called to create, right? Led that consultancy for about a year and a half before I took a leave of absence to go take over as CEO, the second CEO of one of my clients at the time, a company by the name of Threshold 360, which I run. That's the majority of my time I spend focused on that when I'm not leading the Call to Create ministry.
And what do you guys do for Threshold 360?
Yeah, so Threshold 360, our mission is to allow anybody to virtually step inside of any location on Earth. So you can think of us as basically trying to do what Google's done with Street View for the inside of every public location on the planet, right? So 360 photography is nothing new. It's been around for a long time, but we're figuring out how to do it at scale. So you've got about 100,000 locations in the United States that we've created this content thus far. By mid next year, we'll have the majority of the United States complete. So we go out, we create the content, and then we turn it around and license it to publishers of location information, right? So at the local level, that's destination marketing organizations like Visit Houston and Visit Tampa Bay, local directory companies. And then there's obviously a lot of really large companies, mapping companies, the TripAdvisors, Yelps of the world, who we're in conversation with about licensing the content.
Excellent. Are you guys bringing in like virtual reality and those kinds of things?
Yeah. So we view, we view VR as a format for content, right? So, our content is viewable on desktop, on mobile, but it's also viewable within a virtual reality headset. So these destination marketing organizations love that, right? Because they can send, a Google Cardboard or some other VR headset along to a meeting planner, and they can virtually step inside of all these, hotels and meeting rooms and restaurants and shops within the destination, from their desk. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a really, really fun project and really big opportunity, right? I decided to put my consultancy on hold to focus on this venture and help these guys build something really, really valuable, just because I wanted to be a very good steward of that opportunity. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and I'm honored to be leading the venture right now.
Yeah, awesome. The tech world and that whole tech startup scene is very interesting dynamics, and there really are not too many voices from the church that are really speaking into that. And certainly Tim Keller and Redeemer would be one of those, which it makes a lot of sense how you really got inspired and encouraged by what Tim Keller has been saying. What could you say about kind of the spiritual climate of just that whole scene, and what has been like as a Christian with that church planter drive, with that your ministry mindset going in there, what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so I think it's a similar story to what Christians would find in any sphere of cultural influence, whether it's film or the arts or business in general. But for me, you're running a tech startup, spending a lot of time in Silicon Valley, raising a lot of money from investors. I think the biggest challenge for me has been just radical transparency and honesty about everything that we're doing, right? I think that's a challenge for everybody, but in startup world, especially like really hyper growth tech startups, it's very, very easy to fudge not just numbers, but really the narrative of the company and making people believe that it's doing better than it actually is, right? So just being like very upfront and very transparent, very honest about where the venture's at, where you're at with sales and with traction, that's tough, right? I mean, it's almost become expected that you're just not being totally honest about where you're at within the venture's life cycle. And so that's a big challenge. I think the other one too is, ensuring that we're viewing our employees as a mission field. That's a different mindset, right? I mean, in startup culture, I think the most famous entrepreneurs that have come out of Silicon Valley in the last few decades, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, are famous for a lot of good reasons and infamous for some good reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Infamous for the fact that they don't treat people like people. They treat them as disposable parts of this machine. And we've always got to be thinking about profit, right? Profit. We've got to be figuring out how to maximize profits if we're going to be great entrepreneurs. And the Christian is no exception to that. We've got to produce returns for investors and be really good stewards of that. But I believe there's a way to do that treats people like people and loves them. And so, we've got a pretty large team and a growing team here at Threshold 360. And so I'm always thinking about, how do we love our people really well? How do we prioritize people over profit while also ensuring that profit's essential and really, really important, right? That's tough. It's a really tough balance to strike.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Jordan, what would you say, how would you define an entrepreneur?
If you ask this question to 100 people, you're going to get 100 different answers, right? It's part of the reason why I love asking people this question, right? So, dictionary.com, the traditional dictionaries define entrepreneur as basically somebody who takes a risk and manages an enterprise for financial gain, right? Is kind of the gross oversimplification of that definition. I take issue with that, right? Because I think an entrepreneur, when we think of when you hear the word entrepreneur, names like Steve Jobs and Oprah Winfrey and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg come to mind. And sure, these people took risks. Sure, these people managed enterprises for financial gain. But I think it's like missing a really critical component of entrepreneurship, which is the art of creating something out of relatively nothing, right? Creating something new for the good of others. So in Called to Create, in my upcoming book, I propose, humbly propose a new definition for the word entrepreneur. And it's anybody who takes a risk to create something new for the good of others, right? And, you'll notice I've stripped out any monetary connotations there, right? Because, I believe, an artist that's creating a new piece of art, or an author like C.S. Lewis, whose story I share in the book, I think that's an entrepreneur. Like take Lewis as an example, right? He took a risk. He took social, financial, reputational risk to create something new. We'll take the Chronicles of Narnia as one example, and he did it for the good of others, right? And sure, there was some financial gain there, right? But even if there wasn't, even if he distributed the book for free, to me, that's still entrepreneurship. He's still taking something out of relatively nothing and offering something new to the world for the good of other people.
Gotcha. So really, it's for the good of other people, and the difference. So you would say the difference between a creative and an entrepreneur is that element of risk.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's the element of risk. Although I think you could argue that pretty much all creatives are taking some sort of risk. It's not the same as an entrepreneur, like me running Threshold 360, where there's tremendous financial risk there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think when you're composing a new song, or you're, creating a new piece of art, I think there's other types of risk there. But yeah, I think in the book I use the terms entrepreneur and creative pretty interchangeably, because I think they're pretty similar disciplines, right? At the end of the day, you are trying to bring something to life that wasn't there before, and you're doing it for the good of others and the good of yourself, by the way. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But to me, those are very, very similar disciplines.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about risk, I think for example, if you look at the income aspect, if my income is only coming from one place, like to me, that's a far greater risk than stepping out as a business owner, which, I'd consider to be an entrepreneur, and having multiple customers, multiple clients, to where you're not beholden to any one client. So, in that sense, the entrepreneur is less risky than someone who is just kind of doing what they're told, and they can't.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
So and I've really been wrestling with that, because I definitely get what you're saying about the risk. But when I look at, for example, in the parable of the talents, the master gives the talents, he diversifies his approach. So the risky thing to do would be to put it all to the one steward, but no, he gives it to three. and not equally, but according to, so there's a certain amount of risk aversion that
Yep.
I find many entrepreneurs. I know that I'm sure you have that to some extent as well.
Yeah.
So there's some tension there, and I think the risk aspect, because I did study entrepreneurship in business school. I know there's a
Yeah.
lot of different philosophies on this. That the idea that the entrepreneur is kind of the wild-eyed, risk taker, that's not always necessarily the case.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
So is everyone called to be an entrepreneur in a biblical sense?
That's a great question. So, defined traditionally, right, as someone taking a risk to create, to create financial returns. No, I don't think so, right? But when you expand the definition, as I have in the book, to anybody who takes a risk to create something new for the good of others. I don't know that I could say that everybody is called to that, called to create. But I will say this, all of us have been made in the image of the Creator God, right? So, the first chapter, actually the first words in the book are, on the surface controversial. But I think as you dig into it, I think most people agree with my conclusion that, God was the first entrepreneur, right? He created something out of relatively nothing, not out of relatively nothing, out of totally nothing. We created out of relatively nothing and did it for the good of others. And if you really want to get into it, I think we could talk about the element of risk there. So, we're all made in the image of Creator God, right? So creativity is a core part of our DNA. I think it's interesting that, in the church, we hear a lot about God being loving and omnipotent and holy and just, and he is all those wonderful things, and we should worship him for that. But we rarely, if ever, talk about the fact that God is creative. But that is the very first thing that God reveals about himself in Scripture, right? In the beginning, God created. The first thing he chose to reveal about his character is that. It's an essential, I think you could say, an essential part, a characteristic of our triune God. And so, yeah, all of us have been made in the image of God, and thus I think we all have this propensity to create new things, right? To take something and turn it into something new for the good of others. So I think we are all wired to create, and I think you see in Genesis an explicit call to create, as before God takes a day of rest, he gives Adam and Eve an explicit job description: go, be fruitful, multiply. And lots of theologians have commented about the fact that that's much more than just procreation. It's culture creation, right? It's creating new things. It is continuing the work that God started at the beginning of time, and creating for the good of others.
So for entrepreneurs, there's not necessarily an expectation that I'm a business owner. You're saying that entrepreneurs could be, in a sense, am I right in saying that you're basically using creative and
Yeah,
entrepreneur interchangeably?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So what are some of the quote unquote Christian misconceptions about entrepreneurship?
Well, that's a great question. I've heard a lot over my career. I think the most popular one is that entrepreneurs are greedy, self-seeking, and are only concerned about their personal net worths. That's one. I think throughout the last century or two in American culture, we've seen kind of this caricature of the greedy American capitalist, and so I think the church naturally has a tendency to scoff at that role a little bit, but at the same time relying on entrepreneurs to fund what most people in the church would call "quote unquote" real ministry. But I think there's just misconceptions in the church about work in general, right, and business in general, right. I think there is this often unspoken, sometimes it's explicit, but often unspoken hierarchy of callings in the church, where we elevate the calling of the pastor or the quote unquote full-time missionary, and whether we're saying it or not, we're implying, I think, that those people are the ones that are doing real ministry, and everybody else is there to support that. Everybody else is there to go out in the marketplace, make money, and fund missions, right? I hate that in churches, pretty much all churches across America, missions is a department, right? Missions is something that only people do when they're on a trip to Africa or to Asia, or even, to poor communities in the United States, right? Every business is a mission. Every business is a ministry. Every sphere of culture is an opportunity to make disciples of Jesus Christ. I think the misconception in the church about entrepreneurship is certainly real, but I think it's broader than that. I think there is still this great disconnect between the work of making disciples and what we do Monday through Friday every single week.
Well, let's say that I've heard the work is worship.
Sure. Yeah.
My work matters to God. My 9 to 5, all that. What are still some of those misconceptions that you find among Christians? For example, one of the ones I find is that, I'm a Christian. I want to start a business. Let me go start a Christian coffee shop.
Yes.
As an example.
Yep.
Or what are some of the other ones you run into?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, so I think there's a big there's a big idea in the church that, like, the products that we create, right? So, if you've got that baseline foundational doctrine of vocation, which your audience, everyone listening to this podcast, I'm sure does, right? Yeah, then the deeper questions are, okay, great. Good work is good. I can serve the Lord through entrepreneurship. I think the next questions really center around, the products we are actually choosing to create, right? So great. I'm a Christian entrepreneur. Does that mean I am, I run a Christian t-shirt business, right? Or are there, what is the scope of products that I can create to love others well and reveal the character of God, right? So, in my book, I talk through stories of a really wide variety of Christian entrepreneurs and how they thought about that. So I tell the story about Arthur Guinness, which, again, I'm just inviting controversy here. But, Arthur Guinness's story is fascinating. Are you familiar with Guinness's story, Darren?
Yeah, and how basically there was a day and age when everyone was drinking hard liquor, and there was really no alternative, and he created that safer alternative that was actually nutritious.
Yeah. So it's crazy. So during the gin craze that swept across Europe, the gin craze was really born out of the fact that Europe didn't have clean water, right? So they would make gin, right, which was much safer for them to drink, and it was basically their source of liquids, right? And so Guinness grew up at a time where everyone's getting wasted on gin. Guinness loved Jesus from a very early age, heavily influenced by John Wesley, who preached a pretty powerful sermon at Guinness's home church of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. And Guinness is like, hey, like, I see an opportunity for a product that can really love people. It could help people not get drunk, or at least a heck of a lot less drunk, by creating a much more filling alcoholic drink, the Guinness Stout beer, that's way, way, way lower in alcohol content. And it's safe to drink, right? It's nutritious, much more nutritious than gin was. So, the product was born out of a desire to serve people, right? And to love people really well. It was not an overtly Christian product. Most people are shocked to find out that Arthur Guinness was such a devout follower of Jesus Christ. So, I think the Guinness case study is a really good one, right? Because it points to, how a Christian entrepreneur could think differently and more broadly about the products we create. But Guinness also operated totally differently in how he ran his business, right? So I think, there's this misconception in the church that, Christian entrepreneur is designated by the fact that they put John 3:16 on their products and make all of the T's in their logos crosses, right? Entrepreneurs like Arthur Guinness show us that there's a much deeper way to think about integrating the gospel into our business. So Guinness, we talk a lot about how extravagant Google is and Microsoft is in loving and in treating their employees well and giving their employees incredible benefits. Guinness puts those companies to shame. I mean, read up on Guinness. There's a great book called The Search for God in Guinness that I quote extensively and called To Create. I mean, Guinness went way over the top, paying for family vacations, paying for the entire family's healthcare, paying for college for employees' kids. I mean, it was just extravagant, the way that he treated his employees, and he viewed it as a means of ministry, right? So, I think we've gotten to a good place in the church. We certainly have a long way to go, but we're getting to a better place where people understand that work is inherently good and work of all kinds can be used to serve the Lord and make disciples of Jesus Christ. I think for those of us who are interested in entrepreneurship, it's time to go a step deeper, right? And that's what I'm trying to do in Called to Create, and ask harder questions about, okay, yes, I think God has wired me to create new businesses and new things and new products. How does the gospel shape that? How does the gospel shape my motivations for creating the products I choose to create, and how I run my business differently than the rest of the world?
Excellent. Great answer. And you do a phenomenal job, Jordan, in the book of bringing in those examples and the research. I know how time consuming that is, but you really did the work. And so again, Called to Create is the book. Another question I want to ask you, Jordan, is, so you talk in the book about how we're commanded to make disciples as Christians, specifically through our entrepreneurial callings, which is what we talk about on every episode here on this podcast. How have you done that through Citizen Investor and the other ventures you built?
Yeah. So, I start out that chapter talking about, when we hear the Great Commission, right, go and make disciples of all nations, I think a lot of times in the church we read that and say, oh, we have to go to I have to go to every nation. I have to go to live in a mud hut 5,000 miles away from home in order to fulfill the Great Commission. And that's very demoralizing. I read a great sermon by a pastor named Ken Bond who really broke that down. I was like, no, go and make disciples of all nations. If you look at the word go, right, he's talking about go wherever you are at right now, go and make disciples. On the path you are on, if you're running a business or if you're starting a business, go and make disciples there. So, I've had the privilege through Citizen Investor, through Vocrio, through some of my other businesses, and now with Threshold, to have an opportunity to do that. I mean, business is you spend so much time at the office, so much time with these people. It's just a tremendous opportunity to minister to them and to share the gospel first through actions and ultimately with words. I think I tell the story of some entrepreneurs in the book who the contrast is this convert first mentality and this bless first mentality, right? So, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, great, I'm going to start a business, and my primary directive on day one, I'm going to try to convert my customers and convert my employees to follow Jesus Christ. And, there's actually been some really good academic studies that have shown that, like, that's not how it works, right? You got to focus on serving your customers really well, serving your employees really well, loving them really well, showing that you care about them as human beings in order to earn the right to share the gospel. So, here at Threshold, great example. I was on a plane with one of my employees a couple of weeks ago, and this is a guy I've been working with now for a year. And there have been many opportunities over the last year just to show love to him and show grace to him, and at a level in which hopefully he hasn't, well, not hopefully, but I don't think he's experienced in the past. And we were flying to California together, and I was doing his quarterly review and asking him about what motivates him, what drives him, and he asked me, right? It was just teed up a conversation about the fact that I view business as an opportunity to love others really well and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I was able to just share the gospel right there on that plane. That's because we had built a relationship over 12 months. And sure, I'm not preaching the gospel to thousands of people a day, but one-on-one, employee by employee, I have opportunities open up that allow me to share my faith with them. And business is just it's a great opportunity to build really intimate relationships that soften the ground for people receiving the gospel.
Yeah. And the thing that we explore on this show is the way in which we're called to make disciples of our coworkers, our companies, and ultimately our industries. And I love the example of Guinness. And is it possible if we're called to disciple nations, we need to start with our coworkers, but then our company, and then our industries, particularly if we're leading the company, and Guinness certainly did that. I mean, discipled the alcohol industry,
Yeah.
for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And so how would you frame it in the way that Citizen Investor has, in effect, had a disciple making on a macro level,
Yeah.
had a disciple making effect in the industry? So it's
Yeah.
crowdfunding, but I
Yeah.
mean, is that how you would define the industry, or would it
Yeah.
be
So
philanthropy?
yeah. So we Citizen Investor is pretty squarely in civic technology. So any technology that's, working with government, municipalities. And we have had some opportunities, not as many as I'd like to shape that conversation at a macro level. So, one instance, we've had an opportunity to talk to other startups in that space, and other publications through interviews about why we do what we do. It's a great question, right? That almost every entrepreneur is asked. And we talk a lot about the fact that why we run Citizen Investor, or now why my co-founders who are currently running the business run it, is because we believe that God made cities. He made us to live in cities, and we should love cities really well, because cities are a safe haven for people. God loves people, and so He loves cities. And so it's just a great opportunity to share the why behind what we do. And so we've had a number of opportunities to talk about that at a macro level, and to talk about that with founders of other companies that are doing tremendously well in the civic technology space. And who knows what the fruits of those opportunities and those conversations are going to be, but hopefully we'll find out on the other side of eternity.
Yeah, I mean, like all you can really do is hold up Jesus and
Yeah.
let and let people decide what they want to do with that. I mean,
Yep.
in the way that you talk about the way in which one of the early city crowdfunding projects was the Statue of Liberty, and I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah.
example. It's like, people see a need, or they have a passion for something to be a blessing to their city.
Hmm.
And even if the government doesn't have the money to do it, and then the citizens step up and say, we want to build that park, or we want to,
Yep.
turn on those street lights, or, whatever the case may be. And then you hold up the purpose behind that. I mean, it's the kind of thing that raises the question of why do you do what you do, which
Exactly.
bears the open door.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think all entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs specifically, get asked the why question a lot. Like, the purpose behind a startup is so important, right?
Yeah.
And so I think having a really well-formed answer to that question is just such a great opportunity for the Christian entrepreneur to just talk really deeply about how he or she integrates their faith with their work, right? And it's something I think a lot about, and I encourage in the book other people to have a really good answer to that why question. I think the meta narrative of startup culture right now is that entrepreneurship is cool because entrepreneurship is such an effective means of accumulating fame and fortune, right?
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, right? And so I think there's a huge opportunity for the Christian entrepreneur to say, no, that's not primarily why I'm doing this, or maybe not at all. Like this, I am doing this because God has given me these gifts, and I want to be a good steward of those gifts, and I want to produce a good return for investors, and I want to serve employees well and serve customers well through the products that I create, and I'm motivated to love my neighbor through the products that this business produces, right? And it's much more about pointing people to Jesus than it is pointing people to our personal Twitter accounts and our bottom lines.
Yeah, well said. So we've already talked a lot about the topics in this book called To
Yeah.
Create. Why don't you tell us who this book is for? I think it's pretty
Yeah.
clear already at this point in the interview, and then where people can find it.
Sure. Yeah. So, at the highest level, Call to Create is a call for Christians to embrace entrepreneurship as a means of glorifying God, loving others, and making disciples of Jesus Christ. Right. So, the primary audiences for this book are people who identify as entrepreneurs and or creatives. But it's interesting. We've had the book in the hands of about 300 people for the last month in preparation for the book's release, and almost every single person that has written a review in advance of the book coming out has said, This book is for any Christian that works, which has been great for me. Like, oh, wow, the market for this is actually bigger than I expected. But yeah, primarily I wrote this from my lens as a Christian entrepreneur, as a Christian tech entrepreneur. And so it's for other people who, primarily for other people who share my background and share, a love for business and entrepreneurship. So the book comes out on November 7th. You can pick it up right now. Basically anywhere books are sold, you can buy it. But if you head on over to calledtocreate.org and buy the book early, you can also enter to win a trip that we're giving away, a trip for 2 people to go to Europe. To visit the homes and the workplaces of some of the European entrepreneurs whose story I share in the book. So you're going to go visit Guinness's brewery in Dublin. You're going to go to Haarlem, Netherlands, right outside of Amsterdam, to see Casper ten Boom's watch shop. Go to Oxford to hang out at the pub that C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien used to hang out at. Go see C.S. Lewis's home. And then the trip is going to culminate in a pretty cool experience. So I've gotten connected with C.S. Lewis's stepson, Douglas Gresham, who's become a good acquaintance through this process. And Doug has agreed to meet me and the winners of the sweepstakes in London for dinner, a private dinner, to just talk about his stepfather. Douglas Gresham himself is a pretty talented culture creator in his own right. He produced the most recent Narnia films with Disney, and he's currently producing The Silver Chair. So it's going to be an amazing experience. He's a fascinating guy, literally the last person alive who personally knew C.S. Lewis. So yeah, if you go to calledtocreate.org, you can enter to win that sweepstakes. And it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, it sounds like one of the coolest trips I've ever heard designed. Man, you should be a travel agent, Jordan.
Maybe if this doesn't work out.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, thanks so much for sharing your time and your expertise and for writing this book that's already changing lives and inspiring so many. We need more people like yourself that are running with this message and not only speaking it, but living it out in the business world and beyond. And calledtocreate.org is the website. Jordan, thanks again. We appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, Darren.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can share your feedback and get more information to help you partner with God in business and disciple your coworkers, your company, and your industry at theologyofbusiness.com. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Airlift Marketing. It's a noisy world out there, and at the same time, it's never been easier to reach a highly specific group of people with your message, product, service, or cause. Through website development, social media management, podcast management, pay-per-click advertising campaigns, and branding, Airlift Marketing helps businesses, nonprofits, and authors to reach their target groups with precision and get the highest return possible on their investments in marketing. Reach out to us at airliftmarketing.com to schedule a free 15-minute marketing strategy consultation. Thanks for listening, and keep partnering with God in your business.